Good day and welcome again to another 5-minute Sunday School lessons. We concluded Unit 2 last week and we start Unit 3 today. Our lesson today is in Lesson 9, God Brings Kings on Board. Our memory scriptures is taken from Daniel chapter 5 and verse 21. The Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. Our objectives are summarized into these. We want to help ourselves to understand that 1. God created everything and coordinates man administration. He knows the right instrument to use in any dispensation. And secondly, that God knows everyone and he humbles and raises whoever he pleases to. This lesson is divided into 2 divisions as usual. Division 1 says the people ask for a king, and Division 2, the appointment and service of Saul. So today we'll look at Division 1, the people ask for a king. And under it we are looking at Samuel's failure causes it and Samuel ordered to give them Saul. We begin the first section, Samuel's failure, by looking at our first text in Deuteronomy 17. God was giving the Israelites instructions, and then from verse 14 he began talking about choosing a king. God already expected that Israel will ask for kings to rule over them, so he gave them these instructions well ahead of time. His instructions included that the king must be an Israelite, not a foreigner, must not acquire riches, he must not marry many wives, and he must be patriotic. Simple. This was well ahead of Samuel's time. So when Israel asked Samuel for a king in 1 Samuel 8, God was not surprised. However, Samuel was well displeased. Why did the people ask for a king? The first thing we are told in 1 Samuel 8 is that Samuel was old. He may have judged Israel for over 20 years. He was definitely not as strong and agile, but was probably not ready to give up his responsibilities yet. One thing was sure, he needed some assistance. So he appoints his 2 sons as judges. However, they were corrupt. They accepted bribes and perverted justice. These are the reasons that the elders of Israel gave when they approached Samuel to appoint a king. Their request seems to have been justified. They probably needed a younger, stronger king and a better person, of course, than Samuel's children. Samuel failed in bringing his children up to know the God that he served. They went against everything that God wanted in an Israelite leader. Samuel put his children in positions of leadership but did not train them to be leaders. How many of the people in leadership positions in our society and even churches today were deliberately trained and qualified to be the kind of leaders that God would personally choose? Leaders should train up others to be leaders, and that is discipleship. Leaders should also recognize when they should release responsibilities to others instead of holding on. When Samuel consulted God, God gave him specific instructions to appoint a king. However, God made a statement, "They have rejected me." After Egypt, Israel continuously denied God as their king. They always wanted a human figure. Remember that they preferred to hear from Moses rather than God himself, and they had also requested Gideon and his sons to reign over them as kings. They wanted a system they could rely on, predict, and be in control of. Can we blame them? We also find it difficult today to rely on what we cannot see. We want to be in control. We would rather choose our career, spouse, and even our leaders than wait on God to help us. Our lives continue to be a battle of choice between our selfish desires and what God chooses. So when we see others around us doing well, we forget our uniqueness, our assignment, and what God really wants of us and want to be like others. So Israel asked for a king so they could be like other nations. But is being like others what God really wanted of them? So in the end, God ordered Samuel to give them Saul as king. That's part B. In spite of Israel's assumed rebellion, God still was involved fully in the choice of their king. God's choice of Saul may not have been his perfect will, but he gave the people what they wanted with consequences. Of course, the people's minds were made up and they damned these consequences. God's plan for kingship in Israel may have been for a latter time, but the people hurriedly and authoritatively wanted to fulfill their own desires and not to God's glory. Saul is recorded as the first king of Israel, but we know that he didn't end well. We also know that today, David, who became king after Saul, is much more recognized and is seen as a major character in the genealogy of Christ. Christ's eternal kingship is often spoken of in relation to David's throne. It is not every good thing that is the best thing. The voice of the people may not always be the voice of God. And in the end, God still worked out things to fulfill his plan. He set up the era of the kings in Israel. Some did very well, others did badly. God had set up the priesthood, the judges, and now the kings in Israel's leadership. We see all three in Christ, who is our priest that represents and intercedes for us before the Father, and the one who will judge at the end of the world, and the one whose reign as king will be forever. So our lessons derived. First, God has a lot in plan for us, and he also has timelines allotted to them. We should depend on him and not on our desires to fulfill things at his time. And secondly, human government will continue to take different forms, but God remains the unchangeable governor of all nations for all of eternity. So we've quickly come to the end of another session. Let's meet again next week as we go to the second part of lesson 9. God bless you.